I'm making this video to pay homage to myself 2 years ago. So let's get into it. What's up, YouTube? So 2 years ago, I made a video talking about the 10 things you need to know before you start breeding bearded dragons. Well, I've realized watching that video back that there are more things that you need to know, and there's things that have changed since then, and I've changed since then. So I'm making a 10 things you need to know in 2025 before you need to breed, before breeding bearded dragons. So hopefully, that's like my biggest video. So hopefully this one catches enough of an audience for people to realize things have changed since 2 years ago, and I've changed since 2 years ago. So let's get into it. So if you watched that video, you know that I put it into two different halves. The first half was general awareness of what you need to know to breed bearded dragons. The second half was things you need to not do when you breed bearded dragons. Well, I understand that video had a great, success. It has like 28,000 views or something like that. Great success to me. Obviously, to other people, be like 28,000 views ain't nothing. All right. So essentially, the thing is, there are some shifts in the community since then, and it's for the better of the reptile community. So I'm going to make sure that I bring those up in the same concept. So 5 things you need to know and 5 things you should not do. So 5 things you need to know. The first thing is we got to talk about the weight of the bearded dragon. So back then, 2 years ago, I was talking about all of the males need to be like 300 to 350 grams, and all of the females need to be 400 grams. I don't even know why I said that. I think that I was saying that just to comply with the regulations of what people want them to be. That's not accurate. Honestly, that's a lie, because for me, I don't even like my males to get over 350 grams. I like my males at 300 grams, 275, something like that. Obviously, I have bigger males that are around 330, 340, something like that. And then I have some males that are 370 that I'm trying to get down below the 350 mark. So that was technically a lie. I don't know why I said it. And the females, I never liked my females 400 grams, over 400 grams. I did have some back then that were over 400 grams because that's what I used to know growing up. Whenever I started breeding, everybody was saying, make sure your females are 400 grams, make sure your males are 350 grams. So I was just going based off that. So many things have changed in those 2 years that people haven't realized that those videos are completely wrong. Not all of it, but just certain things are wrong. And I see videos from like 7 years ago, people talking about it. And I see videos of like 5 years ago, people talking about it. I'm like, so many changes happen between each of those videos. And I'm like, dang, how does this community change so often? So I figured I'd make a 2025 one. And then I'll probably make one every so often to comply with the new rules of breeding bearded dragons. So my females, I usually 350 is where my females are, not 400. That's weird that I said that, to be honest, because I have had females over 400, but I don't like them over 400. So I don't even know why I said that. But that's one thing. I don't know. And that's obviously it's reached 28,000 people that are now waiting for their females to be 400 grams or pushing their females to be 400 grams. And some dragons just don't get that big. I actually had dragons back then that were 320 grams or so that just didn't get that big, that were females that are like 17 inches or something like that. So I'm not sure where that information came from. Second thing is, make sure you have enough space for your bearded dragon. You have to have enough space for your bearded dragon because they need somewhere to live. Do not house male bearded dragons and female bearded dragons together, because that will stress out the female and she will continuously lay eggs, and you don't want that to happen. Now, I have had people tell me, well, I house them together and I never get eggs. That one time you get eggs will be the one time that you kill your female, because she's been so stressed the entire time. She's finally laid eggs, or she's finally gravid and now she can't lay them anywhere because the male is always on her. Now she's going to get not impacted. She's going to have egg bound and then essentially pass away from it, or you're going to have to take her to the vet to get the eggs removed. You don't want either of those things to happen, so never house your bearded dragons together. For myself, I personally don't mind the 3-foot enclosures. I said that in the other video. I like 3-foot enclosures that are 2 foot deep. That's about 6 square feet. That's pretty good for a bearded dragon. Obviously, 8 square feet is better, but it's always going to be better than a 40-gallon tank. 40-gallon tanks are like 4 square feet or something like that. It's like 35 inches by 17 inches. It's pretty small. Nobody should ever put a bearded dragon in a 40-gallon unless you're planning on upgrading later on and it's a baby right now. Obviously, you're gonna have to upgrade it before the bearded dragon gets past like that 15-inch mark. After that, they'll need to upgrade to a something that's 2 feet deep at least, because of the fact that you want them to be able to turn around in their enclosure. I personally don't like really going over 18 inches tall. That's just my preference. You can go 4x2x2. That's perfectly fine. 4x2x2s, the problem with me in 4x2x2s is the fact that it just takes longer for the UVB to get to the bottom of the tank. And that's not something that I like. So I just, if you see, I don't know if you can see them, but I like bare bottom tanks. So there's nothing really bringing them closer to the UVB except for one basking platform and one climbing platform like this one is on right here. And that's essentially everything that I prefer in my tanks. Now, if you like branches and you like all this stuff and you like bringing them up higher, that's perfectly fine. That's just not something that I prefer. I've had logs and stuff fall over and hurt bearded dragons. I'm not going to do that again. So I essentially try to minimize everything that's inside my tank. And that's essentially where we are right now. Everything is minimalized. Every single tank looks exactly the same. There's a greens dish, a bugs dish, a basking platform, a hammock, and a, honestly, this is more of a hide, but they get on top of it as well. So you can see my little windows here. I'm able to look in there when they're sleeping. I'm a little nosy. That's just me. That is what it is. As for babies, when you are breeding, you want to make sure you have adequate space for babies. Babies, you can put up to 5 to 10 babies in a 20-gallon tank. It's really based off preference. The more you put in a tank, the more likely they are to nip each other. So you just got to be careful with that. The more you feed them, the less likely they are to nip each other, but they can still nip each other even if they are full. Sometimes they nip just because they're a-holes. Sometimes they nip just because they want to show their dominance. If you are planning on doing a rack system and you put tubs on a rack, you can get like a 6-foot wide rack, you can get a 4-foot wide rack, and just make it, I would say probably like 15 inches tall per level, maybe a little bit more, and then just put your lights on top. You can, I just zip tie my lights to the rack system. I don't screw them in, I don't do anything like that. Just zip tie them in and they won't go nowhere, and then you can just cut the zip ties when you need to move the lights. It's pretty simple, it's pretty easy. I'm actually going to be doing another one that I need more room, so I need to do another one anyway, so I'll be doing for members. So if you haven't became a member already, go do that. Probably a good plug in right now to put in that Patreon tag. And then that is essentially the best way for me is using a rack system, and it's just tubs everywhere, lights everywhere, and a rack. Mine is 6 foot wide and it's 6 feet tall. So it does have a lot more space than a typical rack that you can get at Walmart or Home Depot or something like that, unless you go for one of them steel racks that are not like wire racks, and those are a little bit more expensive. So it's really based off of your budget. And make sure you have lights for everything. Make sure you have UVB lights for the babies. Make sure you have UVB lights for the adults, heat lights for the babies, heat lights for the adults. Pretty simple. The third thing I want to talk about is protein, calcium, and fat intake. This is not so important for the males as it is for the females. The females obviously are producing the eggs. They are producing essentially the money that you're about to be getting, because you're gonna have to sell the babies. And you want to make sure that she is golden. She is essentially going to be your golden goose. So you have to take care of it. You have to make sure she gets enough calcium, make sure she gets enough protein, make sure she gets enough of everything she's supposed to have. The more she lays, the more you feed. If you are in a situation where she's laying in fertile clutches and you want it to stop feeding. So whenever there's infertile clutches, I feed one pinky mouse or one pinky rat. After they lay, I give water and I give greens every day. I don't do any protein until like a week or two after, just because I don't want her to gain all of the calcium, fat, and everything to build the eggs again, just to lay another infertile clutch. So you're technically doing her a service by doing this. And once she stops laying infertile clutches, then you can start feeding her again on a regular schedule to get her back up to her normal weight. You always want them to get back up to their normal weight before they actually lay another clutch. And usually when they lay that clutch, every time they'll go down a little bit in their normal weight, just because they didn't have time to recoup all of their weight. So that's essentially something that happens. Like, I want to say I have a female that's usually about 320 right before she lays. Then she lays a clutch that's like 60 grams. So she gets down to like 260, and then I have to get her back up within the month to 320, hopefully before she lays. And sometimes they lay a little bit sooner. Like that female, she actually laid 15 days after she was locked up with the male. So it does. Sometimes they're on a different schedule than we are. We think everything's going to go on schedule, on par with the averages. It's not. So it's she went 15 days, laid a clutch. Hopefully she gives me 30 days before she lays another one, so I can get her back up to weight and get her everything she needs before she can lay again. Now, as I said, males is not that important, but you still have to make sure that males get their calcium, get their protein, and everything else. Typically, adult males, I don't give them protein that often, only once a week. So adult males are getting greens all of the time, just because I've noticed, and I'm sure other people have noticed too, that adult males get very sluggish when they get overweight, and they don't breed as often, and they don't breed as good. So there's something that you have to consider. Do you want your males to not breed that often? Probably not. So don't make them fat. Pretty simple. So there's that. Then what is this? The fourth thing I'm talking about now? Is this the fourth thing? It's the fourth thing. The fourth thing I want to talk about is making sure that after you have determined all of the spacing needs, all of the finance needs, you have to determine what genes are you going to work with, what morphs are you going to work with. So obviously, hopefully I'm catching you at a time where you are not buying anything, or you're just getting started. So you know what kind of enclosures you need. You know that you need all of this calcium and everything. You know that you need a rack system for the babies. You need everything. But before you buy anything, what morphs do you want to work with? Now, in 2 years, things have changed a little bit, because now red monsters have become more popular. Genetic stripes have become more popular. And I did a little poll. Obviously, it wasn't a huge poll. I probably only had like 10 responses or something like that, just to kind of get an idea of what people are buying in 2025. And people are buying reds, and people are buying wiblets based off my audience. There were some people that wanted yellows, and were some people that wanted zeros, but based off my audience, it was more like 60 something percent reds, 20 something percent wiblets, and then like zeros and yellows were a little bit half and half there. It might have been more. It might have been like 20 people that did a response. So it was all over the place. But that was essentially what I wanted to gather, is figure out where people are in 2025 in terms of what they're buying. And people are still buying reds, because reds took off when red monsters came around. So it is what it is. So if you want to get into that, do your research on red monsters, because there's a lot that goes into red monsters, because they are inbred and they have issues. So make sure you're getting your red monsters from the right place, so you don't deal with any of those issues. So there's translucent, there's wiblets, there's zeros, there's hypo, everything else that goes into it. Leatherbacks, dunners, genetic stripes. Pick something that appeals to you. Don't pick something that just people are wanting. Don't go into reds just because people want reds. I honestly this year have less reds than I've ever had in my life, because I'm not into the reds as much anymore, because everybody else is into the reds. Everybody else is breeding the reds. It's hard to sell reds right now if you're not selling red monsters, and I'm not going to get into red monsters. I have some half red monsters. They are going to breed. I'm not going to list them as 25% red monsters. Now, I will, in the detail in the description, say these have RM bloodline. They're red monster bloodline, because they are. I want people to get an idea of what is in them, but I'm not going to go into detail saying, oh, they're 25%, oh, they're 50%, oh, they're 100%. At this point, it doesn't matter. To me, anyways, what matters is the look. If you have a 25% red monster that looks like a red monster, it doesn't matter that they're only 25%. So that's my general consensus on that. It is what it is. Number five is funds. You already have to spend all this money just to get started. You have to buy the enclosures, you have to buy the lighting, you have to buy the food, you have to buy the rack system for the babies, you have to buy the dragons. Funds are going to take you different places. If you have a $500 budget versus if you have a $5,000 budget, all of this is going to take you to different places. You either start off small or you start off big, and then realize you should have started off small, because it does go into a huge portion of your life. I spend like 3 or 4 hours every day from the time I wake up to the time I have to start working in here. So I literally wake up 5 something in the morning every day just to play in here. I play in here, I guess. And then I go home, because this is not the same building as my home. I go home, and then I eat breakfast, do what I gotta do, run some errands, go to work. And that's essentially where I'm at. So my day consists of, I guess, 5 to 9 in here, 9 to 5 somewhere else. And that is essentially where most people are, is they have to find time in their day to do this because they're not doing this full time. And with that said, is find time. Not only find funds, but find time. Because if you have $500, this is going to be almost impossible. Just the baby rack alone, even if you're going 20-gallon tanks, just the baby rack alone, you're probably going to spend $150. One of these enclosures, if you go dubia, you're still spending $300 on the enclosure. If you make your own, you're still spending about 150 bucks on the enclosure. There goes $300 right there, and you still haven't even bought the animals. So now you have $200 left. You're not going to find anything worth it. The quality is not going to be there, and people aren't going to buy your stuff. So that's just where I'm at. That's where the community's at. If you don't have, I mean, some of the nicer quality dragons are $300 and up. So you have to at least have $600 just to start with the dragons. Probably probably $1,000 budget is very small in my case. In my opinion, $2,000 budget to start breeding is probably where you should be. So $1,000 just to get you started with some quality animals, $2,000 to get you started with quality animals as well as quality equipment. And that's number 5. And now we're going to get into the things you should not do when you are breeding bearded dragons. So number 1, things you should not do is don't do what everybody else is doing. I 100% will say this over and over again. Don't do what everybody else is doing. Just like I said earlier, if you are wanting to breed for red monster because that appeals to you, perfectly fine. You're gonna have a harder time to sell a red monster because everybody else is selling red monsters. That's why I went to yellows this year. Yellows have always been my thing, yellows and wiblets. But I always try to produce reds, and I always try to produce something different because I know that it appeals to a different market. And that's essentially how it works in my collection. I have reds, I have yellows, I have things that will do zeros, I have things that will do wiblets, and that's essentially how it works in my collection. But that's not how your collection is going to work. Your collection may be a little bit more strict because of your budget. Maybe you can only have 3 animals, and they all have to kind of coincide with each other. The females have to benefit based off the male's genetics. So whatever the female produces, it has to be benefiting from the male's genetics. So that is something that you have to consider. You don't want to just mix and match things just because, oh, this male looks pretty. Oh, this female looks pretty. Even though this female's orange and this female's red, you don't want to do that. You want to do red to red. Make sure you keep your colors consistent because then the babies will come out consistent. So that's number 1. Number 2 of things you don't need to do when you're breeding in 2025 is not having places to incubate your eggs. This is the number 1 thing that I see all of the time. People get everything they need, people get everything they're supposed to have, and then they forget once 2 years passes that they have now males and females that are ready to breed. 2 years pass, and now they start breeding and forget the main thing is an incubator. Incubator was not in your budget when you first started buying everything because you weren't planning on breeding right away. The incubator is now in your budget because you are planning on breeding. Never forget the incubator. Do not let that be an afterthought. This is not a back burner thought. Incubator should be the front of your brain before you start paying your dragons. Because if you don't have a place to incubate them, you ain't got no eggs. Because once you take them out, that's it. Once you lays them, that's it. Are you going to let them hatch on their own? No, because the room temperature is not going to incubate the eggs the same as the incubator is. You want them to incubate at 84 degrees, and the room temperature is not going to get to that. I'm sorry, but it's not. You can put your heat to 84, and that way it stays at 84 in here the entire time. That's impossible. Then you're going to be roasting them. You don't want that. So make sure you have an incubator. Number 2, I think this number, am I number 2? Number 2 is make sure that before you start pairing your dragons, that you have a place for the eggs to incubate. That's a pretty simple thing, but that's something that I've noticed here recently. People always like, hey, where do I get an incubator? How do I make an incubator? My female lay eggs. How do I get an incubator? I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Why'd you pair without an incubator? Like, it's not that hard. This is something you had thought of. The eggs were coming. Once you put them together, the eggs were coming. Where were you at with the incubator? It's a simple question. If you're not here, you're not going to get anything. So that's number 2. Number three, and this is going to sound something crazy because people are going to be like, but I don't have all of the things that I need. This is something that'll help me. Don't partner up with nobody. Don't partner up with nobody. I've seen so many people partner up and it always ends up badly. Don't partner up with nobody at all. Unless you have it in writing, in text, whatever, saying, whenever we get eggs out of this partnership, I get half, you get half, or I get 40%, you get 60%, or I get 25%, you get 75%. Unless that is broken down in detail, do not partner up with nobody because it'll always bite you in the ass. Always bite you in the ass. I've seen people partner up and never, put the details out there, and all of a sudden the eggs start hatching. They try to figure out how they're going to divvy it up, and somebody gets screwed over. And typically the one that gets screwed over is the one with the male because that's essentially how it works. The male didn't do all the work, it just pumped it and left. And so that's essentially what happens. Don't partner up with nobody unless for a fact you have it in writing, and it's even in writing. I've seen it happen. Even in writing, they're like, "Hey, I'm not going to do that." Well, what are you going to do about it? Oh, you can't take me to court. It's not worth it. It's going to cost you more money to take me to court than it is out of the babies that you're going to get. So it's not worth it. So continuing on with what I was saying, partnerships don't work out for everybody. Somebody always gets bit in the ass. And the way the economy is right now, somebody is always going to be more money hungry than the other person. And that's where the problems arise, especially when the babies start hatching and then you start saying, well, I want this baby and I want this baby. They're going to realize, or you're going to realize that the baby that the other person picked is better than your baby. And then you're going to be like, well, no, I want that baby. And then it's just going to be bickering back and forth. Partnerships are not a good thing unless you have a partner that you trust, unless you have a partner that you are friends with, a partner that maybe is your actual partner. Maybe they did a pairing and you did a pairing, or it's somebody that had a dragon, now you have a dragon, y'all got together, and now y'all started breeding bearded dragons together. Whatever the case may be, partnerships don't always work out, and they always lead in fighting, and it's just not worth it. So to me, it's not worth it. So if you are going to do a partnership in 2025, I just suggest you stay clear of it and just save your money and buy another animal for yourself so you don't have to worry about a partnership, because then all of the earnings are for you and not split between you and somebody else. Number four is making sure when you are breeding your animals that you're going off the weight and the age, not just one or the other. Now, this is something that I've noticed. Bearded dragons, some people, the growth rate of a bearded dragon is 100% generic. It's genetics. It's inherited. The end growth of the end growth of a bearded dragon is also inherited. So what you end up with is possibly bearded dragons that grow too fast and stop early. And now you have a 270 gram, 8-month-old bearded dragon that is now essentially 15 inches long. So it's a good weight, but not long enough. So you obviously aren't done there. So you may, if the parents were 18 inches, you still have a little bit more to go. So you may have actually overfed that bearded dragon, and it's actually not supposed to be 270, it's supposed to be 200. So there's that. Or the other end of the spectrum is you have a 2-year-old bearded dragon that's only 200 grams because it's a slower grower. Do you go based off the age or the weight? Go off both. If it's a 2-year-old slow grower and it's a male that's 200 grams, more than likely he'll breed. It's not a big deal. It's the females where you have the issues. If the female is not a good weight, she will have issues when she lays eggs. If she is not at good health, she will have issues when she lays eggs. Good health, how do you determine that? Raise them from babies or buy them from somebody that you know is raising them the right way. There are a lot of reptile flippers. There's a lot of rescues out there. I'm making a separate video on that will tell you, oh, I have an adult bearded dragon. It's only 50 bucks. And you're like, 50 bucks, that's a steal. This thing is riddled with parasites, has respiratory infections, and you have to spend another $500 on vet bills just to get it up to health. And then you wouldn't even breed it because now it's pet only because of all the issues that it had. And that's just something that I take into consideration. And the last one of things you should not do, this is the most important one. In the video from 2 years ago, I put this at number 1. I think it should have been the last one, so people ended the video with this information. Do not do any unethical pairings. I've made so many videos on unethical pairings, but this one's no different. This is probably gonna be the longest section. Unethical pairings are not good. There's a reason they're called unethical. They're not the right thing. Unethical pairings. What are some examples? Translucent to translucent, zero to zero, wiblets to wiblets, zero to het zero, wiblets to het wiblets, leatherback to leatherback. All of those are unethical pairings. And other unethical pairings would be breeding pet-only dragons. If somebody listed something as pet-only, do not buy it and breed it. There's a reason they went into listing it as pet-only. It could have been from a unethical pairing. It could have been that the baby had a slow start. It was a slow grower. They had to pump it full of medications to get it to a good size, to good health. All of this could have happened, and that's why they call it a pet-only. It could have been that it had um, some kinks in its tails, whatever the case may be. If somebody's calling it a pet only, there's a reason why. Underbite, overbite, bad structure. There's so many different things that could make something a pet only that you would not breed. So no unethical pairings. Include pet only pairings. You don't want to do that. Include genetics that are not good. I'm actually going to link a video for what is an unethical pairing, what is an ethical pairing. I don't even remember the title. That's for you to watch if you finish watching this video. Other things is when you do unethical pairings, let's say you're doing translucent to translucent, you're not just making unhealthy babies, you're also breaking down the bloodline. So many generations of people doing het to het or trans to het trans, all of those generations now have gone down the drain because you decided to do translucent to translucent. It's also your responsibility to make sure that the lineage of your bearded dragon does not include translucent to translucent, because that also can play a part in your offsprings, and essentially they could have problems because their great grandparents were from a translucent to translucent. That's possible. That is a very potential thing that could happen. Then with zero and zero, same thing. You're breaking down the line even further because we've been doing het to het for so long, and that's essentially how it works. That's essentially where you get the healthiest babies. Even people that do zero to het zero still have little weaker animals because of it. And overseas in Asia, they do zero to zero all the time, and you're like, well, they're doing it. What's the big deal? Ask them, what do they do with their bearded dragons? Ask them, how long do they keep them? What is the regimen of how long do they wait before they sell it? All of this is important because if you notice what they're doing, if you look at their posts, they put them all in a box and they ship them overseas. Where to? Here. Where to? Pet stores. Because that is who's selling them on their behalf. That is where they're getting their money. They're getting their money as wholesale. Nobody is buying those zero to zeros as breeders. Nobody's doing that. They're doing that for wholesale purposes. You are not going to stoop that low because you're not in it for the money. You're in it for the better of the bearded dragon community, hopefully. I say that. People could be watching this in it for the money. You're in it to better the genetics of bearded dragons. You're not in it to make thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. What is the possibility that somebody starting off could make $100,000 off bearded dragons? Not very possible. Starting off is very hard. Most people don't make it past the first season because starting off is very hard. So if you made it past the first season and you're watching this and you're like, dang, what should I have known? Well, hopefully you learned a little bit. I've learned in the last 2 years. I've learned in the last 13 years. I've learned a lot. And it's never ending. Every year I learn something different. Just last year, I realized that genetic stripes were not incomplete dominant. They were polygenic because I bred a Thunderbolt, which people are calling a super genetic stripe, to a non-genetic stripe. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, no, that's wrong. That's a bad pairing. Whatever you did there is not right. And all the babies came out with some form of genetic stripe that was unacceptable by the community standards because they weren't looking like actual genetic stripes. So it happens. People learn all the time, and it's your responsibility to take what they learn, to take what you learn, and expand that information, expand that knowledge to the rest of the community, which is what I try to do, which is why I have so many videos off in the last 2 years. It's been almost, I want to say 2 years, almost 2 years and 5 months now since I started breeding, since I started making YouTube videos. And it's been great. It's been wonderful. I did not think, I'll say this. I did not think that when I started this November of 2023 or 2022, when did I start this? No, 2022, November of 2022. Jeez, it's been a long time. November of 2022, I did not think that I would be still making YouTube videos. I'm not kidding. I'm being 100% honest. When I started, I was like, I'll do this, see how it goes, and if it doesn't go well, you know, it's no harm in stopping, because people stop all the time. And if it does go well, I can stop at a certain point because the videos are still continuing to bring in viewers and subscribers, and I don't have to do as much work. And now I'm over 300 videos here, and I'm over here like, where am I going to stop? I still have things to talk about. So it's been very interesting. It took me 8 months to get to 1,000 views or 1,000 subscribers. It took me another, I want to say, how long did it take? I want to say another 15 months to get to 3,000 subscribers. So it took me 8 months to get to 1,000, 15 months to get to 3,000. So that means 1 month less than it should have taken based off the first 8 months. So it should have taken 16 months to get to 3,000 after that, but it didn't. And now from 3,000 to 4,000, it took 2 months. It's wild. I don't know where things are happening, how things are happening so quickly. Views are up. I think YouTube told me that I was like 200% more views than usual. So it's like, not only am I getting more views, but it's 2 times more than I usually get. So that means people are liking what I'm putting out, and hopefully it continues that way. Hopefully you watch this video, because it's very important to know what you should and should not do when you're breeding bearded dragons. In this video, honestly, it could have been better. There's so much more that could have been talked about in this video, but it's just so hard to put everything in one video. This video is already over 20 minutes long. It's so hard it's so hard to put everything in one video. So that's just how it is. So there's a lot of videos. If I were you, I would watch everything. Myself, I appreciate if you watch everything. So if you made it this far into the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything that I put out in the future. As always, peace.